Good morning, great to be with you today. My name is Peter Mendoza, and I'm a community program specialist with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. And the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, first of all, I love my job because I get to work with so many people, wonderful self-advocates and family members, and a rich and full disability delivery system that I benefit from because even though I'm a professional in this role, I also receive services from the regional center. So I honor my regional center community. It's really being part of the system that got me to where I am today. What I'm going to talk about today is to share stories about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And setting the conversation for what we're going to talk about today, the Americans with Disabilities Act, while we had other laws that I'll talk about as well, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which guaranteed that people with disabilities can be discriminated with services and programs that are paid by the federal government. This is really kind of the emphasis for a lot of things we have, and like special education, the special education system, the right to be able to access federal services and support, and the right to participate in programs. And then, of course, we have the Lanterman Act here in California, which is really a civil rights act of people with disabilities. And, that started in the late 60s and early 70s through a group of primarily parent advocates, and my mom was one. And I honor her today because she was one of the people that really worked to make sure that we have the developmental disability system we have today. And she also did a lot to really advance special education services and the right for people like me and my brother Michael, who has autism, to be able to have the life and quality of life we have today. The Americans with Disabilities Act, just to kind of bring it back to this discussion, was really the catalyst of making sure that people with disabilities could get in the door. It was the first comprehensive civil rights legislation that really said we have a right to participate, we have a right to be here, and we have the right to do what other people without disabilities do with services and supports. To require that buildings be accessible, that there be accessibility features, wheelchair ramps and other amenities so I can get into the building, lowered counters, but it also mandated things in plain language for people who had intellectual or developmental disability, or accommodations for people with mental health related conditions, quiet rooms for those who have sensory disability, the ability to get on the bus and to have policies that don't discriminate, wheelchair lifts on the bus, the right to housing. Pretty much, while there's other laws that relate to that, the ADA was the one that got us through the door. A lot of people ask, how did I get invited by President Bush to witness the signing of the ADA? Which you believe it or not, it's 33 years ago. I was so young. I think I was 23 turning 24, because now I'm 57. And how I got invited to witness the signing of the ADA is I was involved in a lot of self-advocacy. I, grew up, born in the 60s. When I was younger, before the ADA, there wasn't a lot of services and supports. We had, services, of course, the regional center system. I think I was a client pretty much. I think I've been a client of the regional center for 55 years. I think I became a consumer when I was 2. And so we had services, but certainly we were still having to do a lot of work around to make sure that people could live in the community and work and have a full life. So our services have evolved. And with the ADA, there were also other laws that were already on the books, but they weren't working real well. For example, we had a law that said any bus purchased after 1982 had to have a wheelchair lift. Well, many of the buses when I grew up didn't have wheelchair lifts, so I'm a power wheelchair user. And for those of you who may not be able to see me, I have limited use of my extremities, and everything I do with the assistance of someone else or assistive technology. And I guess I should give a visual description of myself. I'm wearing, I have brown, kind of really short hair, kind of reddish glasses, and I'm wearing a blue shirt and black pants. But we had many laws, but they weren't working, and so I was an advocate. We needed better home care, long-term services and supports. Back in those days, you couldn't get on the bus. Plus, wheelchair access, as far as the bus system, was a new concept in the Bay Area, and many of the bus operators and, frankly, the managers didn't want us to ride the bus. So a lot of the buses didn't have lifts, and then when lifts started coming online, they weren't maintained. The bus drivers or bus operators would complain, you're going to take too long to board, and sometimes they would pass you up, and you couldn't get to where you needed to go. I remember I was doing a lot of work and volunteer work, and many a time I couldn't get to where I was going. I couldn't go see friends without the help of family or someone to drive me. And I wanted the life that everyone else has. I knew that there were some, life things that happen when you have a disability. But basically, I wanted to get out there and really make a difference and have a full life. So I was really active for testifying with the legislature, going to meetings, talking about affordable housing. And it wasn't just me, it was a whole group of people. And one day, this is kind of an interesting story, around 1989, 1990, California had some budget issues. And there was an argument over the budget, so the budget wasn't signed. And back in those days, it doesn't happen so much now. If the budget's not signed, services don't get provided. For example, back then our home care, providers or direct support staff didn't always get paid. So many people with disabilities were at risk. So a bunch of us did a sit-in. This was about a week prior before I got the invite to go to Washington. Did a sit-in at the governor's office, state building, to try to get those conversations restarted because our home health providers were coming to work. And so without care, you're at the risk of institutionalization. So we took the decision that if we can't get home care workers, we're gonna push the issue, and if we have to go to jail, we will. Let me do a disclaimer that it takes all different parts of advocacy to make this work. People who direct action, people who negotiate, people who work within the system, people that do a combination of all three to get things done, and so that people with disabilities or any community that has to fight for their rights can achieve their rights. So we had done a sit-in, so I got arrested. So there was a nice article with a picture of me getting arrested that happened to show up on my local paper. I think it was a Novato Advance. I'm from Novato. And it was in the Chronicle, San Francisco, and I believe I was in the Independent Journal. Well, my dad was a police officer. I love my dad, and I honor my dad for also helping me be the person that I am and giving me so much opportunity. But he was a police officer, so you can imagine that he was not too thrilled about me getting arrested. And I think he might have had some concerns about it being in the local paper. And he was a very loved police officer, so everyone knew him and everyone knew me. So I I lived on my own in a small apartment in Nevada for a few years, but I was still relatively new in my independence, so I listened to the guidance of my family. And my dad would always say what he felt I should do, and so would my mom. And most of the time I'd follow it. Sometimes, I would do my own thing, but he came over and said, we have to talk. And he was really upset that I got arrested. He understood what the issue was, but he was kind of mad. So my dad had a tendency to do rather long lectures, so I had to wait till he was done. And then I pulled the letter out that I just got in the mail like the day before for President Bush, asking me to go to, inviting me to the signing of the ADA. And so I handed it to him, and he looked at it. At first, like me, he was in a state of shock. I don't think either of us really realized what to do when we first read the letter. And then he smiled, and I said, without doing what I just did, I wouldn't be going to the White House. So he said, okay, all good, but be careful, and don't do it too often. So I made arrangements to get to the White House. Now, I didn't have a lot of money, so the county of Marin did a fundraiser to help me get the money to go to the signing. And I want to honor, because it wasn't just me who did the work. It was many, many people, and many, many family members, many agencies, many providers. The community came together to make this happen. Well, so I'm on my way to go to Washington, D.C., and I'm on my way and land at I think it was the Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., and I went with a friend of mine who was also the board president of where I worked, Careers Abound, and he offered to do my home care. He was the vice president of Bank of America. Careers Abound was an employment agency that supported people with disabilities, and in my early years, I was a job coach and job developer. So I'm at the airport, wanting to catch a bus to get to my hotel and to get to the White House. The buses were not accessible. The ADA was going to be signed, and I couldn't get there. Well, I would not be denied, and by whatever legal means necessary, I was going to get to where I needed to go. So I saw a bus come in. It was one of the large MCI buses over the road. They didn't have a lift, of course. It was a high floor bus, and it had a luggage compartment at the bottom. You see them, they run on a lot of Greyhound routes over the road. So I see two police officers as my board president and I are trying to figure out how I'm going to get to the signing and everything. So I said, officers, come here. And before they could say no, they were loading me on the bus, and they threw my wheelchair in the luggage compartment, and off to the hotel I went. And I got there, and I got up early the next day. It was on the south lawn of the White House. And it was really wonderful. I was there with 3,000 other people with disabilities. We were all sort of like in awe that this was happening, because while all this was going on, the ADA had a lot of negotiations. So while we were doing our thing in California about advocating for the ADA, but also working on the local issues like the budget and services and home care, other people with disabilities were in Washington, D.C., demonstrating, writing letters, making their voices heard. Family members, too, people with disabilities, climbed up the steps of the of the Capitol, and they were really, there was a lot of advocacy and negotiations with the legislature, and it almost didn't happen. So the fact that we were there, we were all holding our collective breath until President Bush signed the legislation. I thought when it was signed, my work was done, because my family said, you need to kind of move on from this advocacy thing you do and get serious. And my work wasn't done. And while I did other things along with my advocacy, advocacy is where I want to be because, we have a lot of blessings and a lot of things that we're able to do because of the ADA and other laws. And we need to make the system better. We still have a system where we have to ask permission for a lot of things. We have the right to go anywhere and do anything and be able to work, but people with disabilities still have the lowest employment rate. We now have programs that support people with disabilities, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, attending college. But we need to improve those rates. We need to get people with disabilities, and that includes, of course, our community, to really have a voice. We need to reimagine as we move forward how the system's going to look. I want, through my work in advocacy, first of all, to honor the other people who also work just as hard and harder than I do. It's not just all about me. But I want to leave, when I'm done here, I want to leave the world better than I found it. And I hope through my advocacy and the advocacy of others, we've done that, but we need more leaders. The work can't stop. It continues.